Hello and welcome to The Road to Autonomy. The Road to Autonomy is brought to you in part by Stantec Generation AV. Stantec Generation AV combines some of the most experienced AV experts in the industry with the resources of a global engineering firm. Stantec Generation AV provides education, consulting, assessment, and guidance to any industry interested in autonomous vehicles. Learn more at stantec.com. Hello and welcome to The Road to Autonomy. I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to welcome back Pete Bigelow, Senior Reporter Automotive News. Welcome back, Pete.
Thanks, Grayson. It's great to be back.
It's great to have you here. The first time you were here, we talked all about the wonderful world of experiences around mobility. Today, we're going to talk about interesting times. We'll get to experiences. That's my favorite topic, but it's interesting times. Bloomberg's predicting a recession, 65% chance. We're seeing the layoffs across tech. We're seeing it across industrial. There's an economic slowdown coming. Consumer spending is starting to slow down. At some point, it's going to trickle down to the automotive industry. As consumers cut back on spending, they're going to perhaps look to lease a cheaper vehicle or buy a cheaper vehicle. You're based in the Detroit metro area. How is the industry preparing for a potential downturn?
You know, I think everyone is seeing some of the similar signs that you are, and it's mixed right now. I think how are they preparing is an interesting question, because I think that everyone is concerned that the price of concern might not be the right word, but obviously the average cost of a vehicle is over $50,000 right now. And as we enter a recession or light recession, however it works out, I think there is going to be that consumer pinch. So it's an interesting time because there's not that many vehicles, at least like there were before when you had a whole portfolio of smaller, light duty, compact cars. Like those are gone by and large. So I think the auto industry might be in a position to either follow Elon down the cost-cutting lane or get pinched. But it's a big question mark, a good question, and I don't know that there's like a surefire strategy that's emerging just yet.
The Tesla cost-cutting is fascinating. He's the biggest disruptor in automotive. He's disrupting, if you want to use the term, the good old boy network. He's forcing them to take baths on cars. Elon is dictating the price of the auto market. How long can this continue for?
Well, I think that it might continue as long as Elon's strategy of pricing automated systems is a subscription add-on that kind of brings Tesla through the other end, and they can go down the road of volume for a while until that comes online. And to some extent, automakers need to follow that. They need to be pricing subscriptions for features and thinking, ahead 5 to 10 years. When does everybody catch up and you buy your hardware and then subscribe to the operating system writ large? Tesla's pretty far down that road and still very far ahead. When does everybody catch up to that? And how do consumers react when we get there?
I'll say it to you this way. I'm neutral on Tesla. I'm not a Tesla bull. I'm not a Tesla bear. I'm neutral on Tesla. I respect the pajamas out of what Elon's built, especially around the charging infrastructure. And he's right on a lot of things. The software subscription is going to turn out, he's going to be right on that. You will see announcements with several of the larger OEMs, both American-based and German-based automotive, are going to move to level 3 systems where they're going to brand it, let's call it a personally owned autonomous vehicle, where you go from your rural residence on the highway, and then when you get to a denser environment, you'll take over and drive. If Tesla can figure out that, let's call it the first 75% of the stack, and you're going to pay $199 a month for it, and it starts working consistently, that's a very big business. And putting on my economic hat, Pete, that's a very profitable business.
Absolutely. I think that the business strategy behind it is very sound and enticing. So I'd agree with you on that. I think the big question is, does it actually work? Is it safe? How many nines of safety and reliability can they build in? I'm not convinced that it's safer than human driving right now. There's just so many questions about that. Obviously, there's another death attributed to automated driving system that Tesla's put on the road. That's 17, I think, since June or July of 21. Obviously, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration continues to monitor that and investigate whether they ever do anything about it. That's a real, from an economic perspective, that's a big risk to Tesla's business model right now.
There's a lot of risk to Tesla's business models. There's a lot of risk to other manufacturers' business models. Then there's the manufacturers or the global OEMs that are taking advantage of downturns. I've been studying the economics of the auto industry lately, and I want to highlight to you Ferrari. Okay, they were spun out of Stellantis in 2016. They're publicly traded. Their financial balance sheet has never been stronger. They have rock solid credit, AA minus if they were rated according to Bloomberg Intelligence, but their credit is not rated. They have 1.38 billion euro in cash with an appreciating euro. That's very good there. So about 1.7 billion US in cash. And this is the most important thing, being in Detroit, they have no pension liabilities. I repeat, no pension liabilities. They're trading as a luxury company. They've got a 49 PE and a 23% profit margin. They've got the credit, as I said, with a AA minus if they were rated. They've got cash. They've got margin. They've got a backlog. They're able to make a move. And let's go back in the Ferrari way back machine here. I'm going to have fun with you. The CEO of Ferrari at that time, Ferrari will never make an electric vehicle. Wrong. Ferrari made an electric Ferrari. Ferrari will never make a SUV. Wrong. Ferrari is making an SUV. Then the CEO today says, Ferrari will never make a self-driving car. And I'm going to predict, wrong, Ferrari will make a self-driving car at some point in the future. Does Ferrari use their balance sheet to look into how do we dabble in autonomy from an experience standpoint? Because if you look at their balance sheet, they make 18+% of revenue from licensing. The Ferrari brand has a lot of licensing weight. Do they explore options to generate that revenue? Very similar to what you described with subscription with Tesla, Ferrari has it with licensing revenue.
Well, that ties into our previous conversation, Grayson, with how do you experience autonomy? And maybe that is having a Ferrari branded autonomous vehicle take you on your winery tour in Napa or something like that. I'm not so sure. I guess this kind of gets into splitting hairs. Do they ever sell a car that has an autonomous system versus one that's branded? I don't know. I don't know if that follows that, rubric you laid out with them saying that they were never going to do it an EV or an SUV and then they do, because the experience, Ferrari's brand is luxury and the thrill of driving. So I don't see them taking away the thrill of driving from people in a conventional vehicle, but I do see it as a possibility. To your point on they're making a lot of money licensing the brand, and maybe it's some of these very high-end experiences where you have a Ferrari branded automated vehicle that takes you along for the ride for that particular experience, whatever that may be.
It's a status symbol at the end of the day. Okay, so let's go. Let's take this one step further. They have the park in Abu Dhabi, Ferrari Land. Not Disneyland, but Ferrari Land, from Disneyland for adults, if you want to use that term. What if they made, Chris Gerdes and the team at Stanford built a self-driving race car. They ran at the Willow Runs racetrack. You and I have been out there when Joshua was very kind to host his self-racing cars. Perhaps they make an amusement ride. It's a self-driving Ferrari amusement ride. That's one way to make a self-driving car. But then the other time is, sometimes I have a lot of friends that own several Ferraris. You go on, if you want to take on the highway and you want to go from where I live down to Miami, you don't want to drive the highway, it's boring. So maybe you put in a level 3 system in the Ferrari and you brand it as the world's first fully autonomous vehicle. Even though you and I know it's not an autonomous vehicle, it goes back into the marketing brand cachet. And then being Ferrari with your 23% profit margin, let's add a software layer on there and let's bump those margins up to 30%. Shareholders will, in the term Ferrari, they'll roar.
That's a tough one because there's Mercedes-Benz already putting level 3 vehicles on the road, at least in small numbers in Nevada right now. So are you the world's first? And does it, I don't know. I don't see that. That's kind of getting into now you're just transportation.
But you're a brand. The new EQS, the 580 Plus is an incredible vehicle. Then you have the new Maybach EQS. The Drive Pilot works good. I won't say great. I'll say good. It works pretty good on a highway. When you get to some complex interchange on highways, it doesn't work so well. But overall, it works really well, and it's a great step and a great feature. Mercedes has the ability to really, let's call it, update it or outperform it, and that becomes interesting. Does Mercedes end up becoming a large player in this? Because the EQS, I said, is a fascinatingly well-engineered vehicle that's fun to drive, but if I'm going to drive 3 hours on the highway, I turn on Drive Pilot. It's great.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously there's still few on the road right now that this is a very controlled launch and controlled first step, right? So anybody, I think, it's very early innings for level 3 technology on the road. I guess I just see it more as a Mercedes-Benz brand for my luxury conventional travel, more so than a Ferrari brand thing. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they do step in with something that gets you up and down the East Coast in Florida.
You never know what's going to come, but it's going to come back to experiences, and autonomy is coming into the luxury market because the luxury consumer is willing to pay for luxury. I'll give you an example here. So you want to talk about consumers paying for luxury. Hermes has returned 36% year to date. Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy has returned 30.47% to date, compared to the S&P, which only returned 7.72. Consumers are paying for luxury. Wall Street's being rewarded. And then we recently had the announcement, finally, I repeat, finally, Jaguar Land Rover, now they're calling themselves JLR, they are going to introduce a fully electric Range Rover. Going on the record here, Pete, it'll be the best-selling all-electric SUV in history, and it's going to blow the barns off the doors. But the only concern I have with that in the short term, the new model year came out in the last 12 months. So if you're on a 3-year lease, you start ordering at the end of the year, maybe the first 2 years are a little hesitant. And the other issue I have with it, they haven't released a true range on it yet, but it's going to be beautiful.
It does seem like they're a little bit behind right now, and your prediction of the best-selling ever is bold. You know, Jaguar Land Rover is interesting right now. Obviously, was it yesterday that they rolled out the 4 sub-brand strategy? They're obviously at a crossroads. I would anticipate the EV being successful, as you mentioned. I'm not going to go as far as best-selling of all time off the bat. I don't quite get the 4 sub-brand strategy that they rolled out yesterday. I don't know if you're a sports fan, but there's kind of the old adage that if you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have a quarterback. It seems to apply here. Like, we have these 4 sub-brands in this house. Like, I'm not so sure that anything was wrong with Jaguar Land Rover, especially the Land Rover part that is curiously missing in the remaining 4 sub-brands here. But they're clearly at a crossroads in some way, and they have a bridge that has now been laid out. But I don't quite know where they're going right now.
Well, we do know, and they have made public, they're going to invest £15 billion over 5 years to electrify. But you look at consumers, you drive down the road on the east coast of Florida, Range Rover. The new Defenders are everywhere. The Range Rovers are everywhere. The HSEs. You don't see very many Jaguars. To me, it's the Range Rover brand, or if you want to just call it Land Rover, that's really what it is. Why are they putting all this emphasis in the Jaguar? They have the I-Pace, and Waymo's using it to a great extent, but once you put it into a commercial fleet, it loses its cachet. Could you imagine a Ferrari in a commercial fleet? It would lose its cachet. Or a luxury product in a commercial sense, it would lose its cachet. It loses brand value. When you lose brand value, you lose pricing power.
I mean, maybe that's the split here. Maybe Jaguar becomes the brand that goes into autonomous fleets where Range Rover, Defender, Discovery live on as the personally owned vehicles that are sold to great fanfare, as you predict. But now, go back to our branding conversation and experiences. If you are in a Jaguar I-Pace, you're likely in a Waymo vehicle right now. Or how are you thinking about that as Waymo kind of gets the Pacificas out of its fleet and adds the I-Pace to be its workhorse now for at least the medium term until the Zeekr robotaxis are ready?
Jaguar, not a luxury product anymore. It's the Waymo car. And that's what it's going to be. It's going to go in the zeitgeist as the Waymo car. And that's what consumers are going to know about it. It was funny. I was at my daughter's school this morning, and they invited me to come talk about self-driving cars. And there was this very cute young kid. He said, "Excuse me, Mr. Brulte." And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "My daddy has a Defender. Can you teach me how to make it drive itself? Because I think that would be really cool." And it was an old gear shift Jaguar, but that imagination where he's like, my daddy would like that. But it's that brand psyche where it's there, and that kid knew it. So, okay, so let's put. I'll put my Oliver Blum hat on here for a moment. Oliver Blum, CEO of VW and Porsche. He has the brand IPO strategy. He's been very bullish on talking to Wall Street. There's the rumors about a potential Lamborghini IPO, but one IPO that did happen, Mr. Blum IPO'd Porsche. It was oversubscribed. It's returned 19.16% year to date. What Mr. Blum's doing, he's unlocking brand value, working very well for him. Would the same work for JLR if they unleashed the Range Rover brand under the Land Rover badge to start to unleash that value? Did Tata spin it out? Are they destroying shareholder value by their current structure?
You mean the current one or the four sub-brand one?
I think the whole thing is convoluted and there's no clear message.
Well, I think losing Land Rover is problematic. So that to me does not help the value. If you told me that was going to be a spin-off and Jaguar was going to become the robo taxi brand, like that would be really interesting. But yeah, these two seem to be going in. I'm not sure the same strategy works for JLR and Volkswagen. It could be that one is successful employing it and the other's not.
That's a very valid point. The Land Rover brand's where the money is. Do you sell Jaguar to a private equity fund just to kind of get rid of it and make it a fleet vehicle? They're trying to revive it. They've been very public with that. But to me, if you say, hey, I can buy Land Rover stock, you're going to appeal to a certain investor that wants to own that because they like the vehicle and they see it everywhere. It goes back to the certain investment mentality. Oh, so I started buying Haynes because they was everywhere in the stores and my friends liked it. You could start to attract new investors in that way. So you have CEOs that are taking different tacks. As I said, Mr. Blum is doing a wonderful job unlocking the value inside of VW. And I'm looking through all the VW brands. If following Mr. Blum's strategy, is it perhaps a Bentley IPO coming in the works at some point?
I mean, that's very interesting speculation. Or how about Scout? Is that too, I don't want to say pedestrian a brand, but is that too mainstream a forthcoming brand? Yeah, that'd be interesting to see how they break it up and then how they support that.
It's going to be interesting. There's only certain brands that you're going to be able to spin out and hold as a separate independent company. Obviously, Porsche is one of them. Bentley has the licensing business. They have their car business. And Lamborghini could possibly do it just based on the historicals, what we're seeing here from Ferrari. So then in Tata, that's needs a corporate rebuild. So I'll just say there. When you look at these different strategies, you have Mr. Blum, who's clearly understanding how to operate in the public markets. And then you have our friends. Let's call them our friends in AV world, autonomous vehicle world. They don't know how to operate in the public markets. They decided to go public. In some cases, no revenue. Some cases, very little revenue. They're struggling to raise cash. We got interest rates going up. The Fed could raise another 25 basis points. Why do you think the autonomous vehicle industry was such in a rush to go public?
You know, that's going to be a great business school case study in about 5 years. I kind of feel like everybody saw the EV SPAC succeeding and raising so much money that they didn't want to be left. There's fear of missing out, like fear of missing out on that big burst of cash up front, and they thought they were going to make it through the other side. And now that's very clearly either flat out not the case at a lot of places, or it puts a lot of people in a very precarious position.
It's sad. It's truly sad. If you're sitting there and you raise hundreds of millions of dollars or $1 billion, you've got the budget to hire a really great advisor or somebody that understands the fundamentals of public markets. They all failed. I'll just tell you point blank, they failed because they weren't prepared to go public. Yes, you're right. Do you want to call it the SPAC attack or the Chimoff? They want to go the foam. Look at Virgin Orbit. It imploded. All these a majority of the SPACs are imploding. The one where I have to give a lot of credit to, they went as a SPAC, Luminar. What Austin Russell did. You speak to Mr. Russell, he got really great support from Alex Gores. Really great business advice. Very smart gentleman, very level-headed. They had the team at Luminar, the board deserves, I'll say the board deserves all this credit for what they did. They surrounded Austin with the right team to help him manage a public company, put all the frameworks in place. And yes, has the stock been volatile? Yes. But it's succeeding. They're closing deals. They're generating revenue. They put the right team in place. And you got to give them a lot of credit for that.
Yeah, I think that they had a focus on manufacturing and manufacturing at scale years ago. And that's when it mattered, because that's what's enabled them to, close all these deals that are now starting to enter series production. Was it late last year, early this year that they started? So like, they're not talking about a future product. They're talking about a current product that is on the Volvo XC90. And they had a really good strategy, as you mentioned. And I think that goes back to the focus on manufacturing at scale that started 5 years ago. And whereas everybody else was just starting to put those plans into place now. So I think that Luminar is clearly the exception to that SPAC rule. I can't think of another company off the top of my head that, well, here's a curveball, Grayson. Do you think Nikola is actually going to ride out its storms? And I mean, they were the first one in the transportation space. Like, is it plausible where they're going to make it to that long-term future now?
In this economic environment with rising interest rates and a recession on the horizon and the brand damage, no, I don't see it. And then this gets into the whole debate on the backside of that is the infrastructure debate. We remember when Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor of California, he wanted to very famously build a hydrogen highway, and he went up and down from Sacramento to Los Angeles promoting this hydrogen highway. Couldn't build the infrastructure. We don't have the infrastructure right now for hydrogen. I am very bullish on long-haul trucking Class 8 autonomy for hydrogen. I think that's the future, but we have an infrastructure problem. We're seeing that on the electrification side. We have an infrastructure problem because there's the grid resiliency. When do we get to the point where investors and the operators say, okay, we're commercializing our business, we got to start focusing on the infrastructure? It's very simple. I was talking to kids today about Bob Vila from This Old House. You're going to build a house. First thing you do, you get plans, you put it on a foundation. The infrastructure is your foundation. When did the operations team start to lay the groundwork for the infrastructure?
Well, this is a big question. I'm gonna carve this up. Like you mentioned, infrastructure for hydrogen, infrastructure for EVs, and the grid. So I think those are three separate subtopics here that we can do our sub branding on. But and there's very different answers. So let's stick with hydrogen for the time being. The Department of Energy is taking the next steps in its hydrogen hub initiative. I believe that the next round of applications is due this month. So we should have that narrowed down soon. I'm bullish on that too, in the sense that if they really pick smart places as opposed to people who've got their hands out who want to just land the next project for their district or whatever, I'm bullish on the long-term future of hydrogen because, in part, there's a commercial foundation for it in long-haul trucking, as you mentioned. And if you really start thinking about how that rolls out, it's like you don't need 150,000 hydrogen stations off the bat to make this work. You need to know what route you're running, and you put them strategically along that route. And then pick your places where there's a critical mass of commercial activity, and these things get built hand in hand. On the EV side, it's a tougher nut to crack because on one hand, a lot of people charge at home. Like, this is not the gas station model. I'm not sold on the fact that we need to replicate that in a meaningful way. But you do need something in the public realm. And I'm not so sure what that is right now because what's out there is not working right now. And I think we are at a inflection point for electric vehicles where it's a very real possibility that the main storylines we're seeing a year and a half from now are about new owners who are demoralized or angry about their public charging experiences. And we're going to start to hear a lot of those stories. That would be my bold prediction for the podcast today is that we're kind of on the threshold of critical mass of angry new EV owners who are having problems getting from point A to point B.
I want to get to the hydrogen, but I want to start with the electric. Took my family, we went on a road trip and we stayed at a hotel. I had enough juice to get there in my electric vehicle, but I wanted to explore, so I had to charge up. Well, I ran into charger hogs that sat there overnight, over 24 hours. Level 2 charge, very slow, but it's level 2. I go into the front desk. I said, I'm not paying my bill for my room if you don't get this person off the charger and let me charge. You have been warned. All suddenly, 10 minutes later, that vehicle was moved. And I was able to charge. But if you look at this, I think they had, it was a nice resort, 60 rooms. They had 4 chargers. 2 were Tesla, 2 were the SAE plugs. That's not going to be sufficient enough. From an infrastructure, if you're a hotel, you have to have more chargers. And I'll take this even to a crazier level. I went to Disney World a few months ago, stayed at the hotel. How many chargers do you think my hotel had?
0 or 1.
2 for 400 rooms. Repeat, 2 level 2 chargers for 400 rooms. How is that sustainable?
And even if you get one of those chargers, I feel like, it's not convenient as you just laid out. Like, how do you, if you're the hotel, do you have to like implement a lottery system or a queue in some way? So you have to manage it. I think that Tesla, back to them for a minute, has a big advantage in the supercharger network. I think it's incredibly convenient in a way that it offers a convenient experience that no other brand offers today. But even that is problematic in the sense that, if you want to do, if you're going to charge as fast as possible to kind of decrease your charging time, over time you're going to degrade the performance of your battery at a faster rate. And back to the idea that a year and a half from now, people are going to start asking questions about this EV revolution. One of the questions is how there's trade-offs, whether it's hydrogen or the status quo or EVs, there's trade-offs any way you slice this right now. And this particular one is, do I charge at a faster time and kind of degrade my battery at a faster rate? There's no free lunch here in any scenario. So it's a very interesting time.
And then the consumers, I wouldn't advise you to buy an electric vehicle. Lease it, give it back. Who cares about the battery? That's not your problem to figure out. Get a new one. And then obviously that's a whole complicated situation around recycling. But if you get back to charging infrastructure, it's very expensive to install. It's not cheap to install. I don't know how we're going to get over this one. Consumers expect it to be free. Obviously, that's going to go away at some point. You have that issue. Do we have a very large multinational, a Honeywell, a Hitachi, perhaps I'm going to go to like a Siemens, or they're industrial, so I'm just going to say a Lockheed Martin because they have the balance sheet, that does energy as a service, where they're just going to start charging, where if you're Pete's restaurant, let's say you've got, 40 top restaurant, and you do, say, 200 covers an evening for dinner, and your customers need a place to charge, but you don't have the cash flow because your margin is very tight in a restaurant to put charging in. But one of these large companies says, hey, Pete, we'll do energy as a service here in your parking lot. You're not going to have to pay for it. Does that become a possible solution?
It does, from the perspective that I think there's a lot of places that put EV chargers in like rest stops or restaurants today, and they're finding that there's a rude awakening to some of the costs that are going along with that, be that upfront or recurring costs with utility companies, and they're in sticker shock at some of these bills that they're getting. And I think from the consumer perspective as well, that's another problematic area. Is this has been billed as far cheaper than gasoline, but sometimes when you use these public chargers, guess what? They're pretty expensive. So you really cut into that idea that this is going to be a cost savings. And that's one of the things people talk about at their dinner tables right now. And should we get an electric vehicle or not? I think that they're great to be that second car that gets you around a defined area. You're doing your shopping at Target or Costco, or you pick up the kids from school, and then you go back home to your home charger and charge at night. That's a pretty good model right now. But things that lie beyond that, I'm not so sure.
Then you have the weight issue. From weight issue, insurance goes up. Your insurance for an electric vehicle is more. That's not talked about a lot. Then you have the unfortunate situation we're seeing with garages. They can't handle the weight of these vehicles. It goes back to infrastructure. The infrastructure is not prepared for the mass adoption of electric vehicles, but yet there's these policy regulations, EV, 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 and I keep saying, hello, infrastructure. It's not part of the conversation. We saw the unfortunate accident in New York with the weight of the garage. There was a report that came out of the EU that a lot of their garages are not prepared for all that weight. To upgrade and retrofit a garage to meet safety standards, or if you're in California, to meet hurricane code, it's very, very expensive.
I'm always intrigued when one side pushes EV, as you've laid out. And I think you clearly see that with policy in the US, where onshoring the supply of raw materials to offering consumer incentives, it's been all EV all the time. If we get down to is this about pushing EVs or pushing zero emissions? Because back to our hydrogen conversation, these don't necessarily have to be. There's a Venn diagram here that overlaps, no question. But you could convince me that hydrogen fuel cells have a big role to play, especially in decarbonizing freight movement, which is a far bigger contributor based on number of vehicles on the road to carbon emissions than the light duty fleet. So if you really want to get at this, we need to thwart climate change, which I believe we do. So, I think we need to looking at the low hanging fruit, which to me is the commercial sector much more than the light duty sector. Again, back to this is complicated. There's trade offs in everywhere you turn here, and I feel like we need a policy that reflects that more so than force feeding us EVs in a way that could really backfire here in the short term. Again, like what are we going to see starting in 18 months? What happens when we don't have the lithium supply to meet all these mandates? These are very legitimate questions. So yeah, I'm not sure which way to turn here, but it's lose, lose, lose right now. And I doing nothing is not the right answer either. I want to be clear about that. I do feel like we do need to move towards zero emissions.
We do, but to me, we have to take a multi-pronged approach. It can't be a one-size-fits-all. And Matt McClellan from Covenant Logistics, one of the largest expediters in the country for trucking, and he made a very fascinating point around renewable diesel. He said, is it zero emissions? No. But is it reduced emissions? Is it getting you towards there to start the process of moving towards hydrogen or moving towards battery electric? Yes. But it's demonized. But it's a stepping stone. You can have the heavy-duty diesel today, or you can go to renewable diesel. That's a better option as you work towards it. But it just seems that you have to jump all the way here. Don't have the infrastructure. Renewable diesel can run off traditional diesel infrastructure today. It's there. But yet, we're not refining it.
You can make the same arguments. Green hydrogen is a very small percentage of the current hydrogen market, maybe 1 or 2%. And the idea of using blue hydrogen now, or something that is producing some carbon emissions as a bridge to get toward green is demonized in a lot of ways. And I'm not sure it should be. I think these are both viable, or along similar lines. I'm very intrigued by this. I don't know if it's a joint venture or collaboration or what you call it between Toyota and Exxon on green fuels that they just started talking about publicly within the last few weeks. It's intriguing. I mean, if you say you can reduce carbon by 75% with a drop-in solution, I don't think we should be closing the door on any of these things right now.
We should keep it open. That's at Exxon. That's been driven by Dan Ammann, former CEO of Cruise. He's leading that effort, and Exxon is ramping up the renewable diesel refining capabilities are going to come online in 2025 in Canada. But we have to try everything. If it's taking us in the right direction, why don't we try everything just to see what happens? We can't sit in the current circumstance we are today. We have to try things. We're trying that with Autonomy. We're going to get there. It's funny. Look at Cruise. So Dan was CEO of Cruise, and now he's doing the mission over at Exxon. And part of the Cruise mission was all around sustainability, running all electric. And Cruise, they're scaling. Where we got San Francisco, Phoenix, Scottsdale, Austin. I'm hearing Atlanta, Miami next. That sucker's really starting to scale. What are your thoughts on the scaling there at Cruise?
I think that if they can pull that off, and I think there's clearly still some challenges in their San Francisco operations. They had a crash in June, days into their commercial service offering without safety drivers. They hit the back end of the bus more recently, I think, which you probably saw. They're having lots of problems at intersections and in clustering at intersections, I should say. So I think there's some very real operational challenges that are proving problematic. But if they can pull this off, where they're going to flood these other cities at the same time and not lose billions of dollars in the next few years doing it, it feels like a risky play in a way from the business end of things. Like, this isn't refined by any stretch in San Francisco where it's working. But nonetheless, if they can take the technology and bring it to other cities and not have these same sort of testing run up, or not need to change the software in substantial ways to be in new environments, like, it's a pretty big advantage. But it does feel like this is a pretty big risk at the same time, because they've talked about generating $1 billion in revenue by 2025. I don't know when they expect to be profitable, but I don't think GM is going to lose billions upon billions through the end of this decade. So it feels like a high risk, high reward scenario maybe that they're pursuing.
It's Cruise is the future of GM. I think what Mary and Paul are doing, they're going to continue to do it. I'm very bullish on Cruise. I think it is going to work. It is a land grab at this point. But you mentioned the bus. You mentioned the intersections. How many stupid drunk humans hit buses every day? How many stupid drunk humans run into sidewalks? It's never reported. Go pull police logs. There's this demonizing. Oh, the Cruise did this. The Cruise did that. Well, go talk to the drunk guy. Talk to the guy that fell asleep. Talk to the guy that's high on methamphetamines. Pull up a police report. There are a lot more, but yet it's this focus.
There's a lot more human vehicles on the road. So yes, there's a lot more. And yes, in some ways humans are setting a low bar, but I mean, there need to be some serious, academic studies that we just don't have enough data yet, but prove to me that self-driving technology from any company is better than the status quo. That's the lowest bar. I mean, we've been sold on this promise that they're going to be exponentially safer. I don't see that yet either. But again, we have too few million miles of real world data to really make meaningful conclusions on safety right now. But safety remains a big question.
Why is safety a marketing term? Why was this marketed as safety? Why wasn't this marketed originally as a convenience, as an experience? Riding in a self-driving car, it's an experience. It's it's San Francisco, Rice-A-Roni, San Francisco treat. You're going to San Francisco, you're riding. That's an experience. To me, on the early days, it's a tourism tool. It's a way to drive economic development. But yet this industry goes safety, safety, safety. Safety doesn't sell. I repeat, safety does not sell. What sells is convenience. When a consumer gets in the vehicle, they expect it to be safe. When a consumer gets on a Boeing plane or an Airbus plane, a Delta, United, American, whatever it might be, they don't tout safe, safe, safe. They tout on time. Yes, our on time is this. They don't tout safety, but yet our industry, safety, safety, safety. It doesn't sell. It doesn't drive consumer adoption.
No, and we're almost at a point where up until recently in very select cities, there's not really been products for consumers to adopt. So I think the safety line has been very much geared toward policymakers and regulators.
Yeah, you have two different audiences. You want to hit $1 billion in revenue, you need consumers. You need to get into a business travel plan where we're going to reimburse our employees if they take your vehicle. It's two different audiences, two different markets at the end of the day.
Well, and to be fair, I think, and I like the idea of comparing aviation to automotive in this sense, in that the airlines do not compete on safety. But that's because they're not killing 40,000 plus Americans every year. We're very fortunate that over the last 10 years, I think the Colgan Air crash in Buffalo might be the last significant commercial aviation crash that resulted in fatalities. And automotive is just totally different, where we have 105 people every day in America dying on our roads. And you talk about things nobody cares about. It's stunning that just flies under the radar as the cost of doing business for our transportation system. And, I think there is some legitimate altruism to that in terms of how some of the self-driving companies are positioning their products as vast improvements upon that. I think Mobileye has been pretty specific about saying, what if we got to 40 deaths a year as opposed to 40,000? Is it? Do we have conclusive data about that? I think we do have some interesting studies from the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety on automated emergency braking, significantly reducing rear-end crashes. So if you want to talk about automated driving technology reducing crashes, that's a good start. But I don't think we have anything that says robotaxis are demonstrably safer than the status quo in San Francisco, Phoenix, or anywhere else.
Everybody agrees what's happening on our road today is nothing short of a carnage. It's gross. It's disgusting. It's sad. There's a lot of broken hearts and a lot of bad memories, and we have to do something. But the way that this industry is, in my opinion, has gone around marketing is not the right way. What marketing ADAS towards safety, automatic emergency braking, lane keep assist, the drowsiness, that I get. Those are tools. You're engaged driving. Those are tools. If you're backing out of your driveway, perhaps there's a hedge and you can't see, and a child goes by on a bike, and the brake stopped automatically, so the child can save that child's life. That's safety. That sells because you're the human is in charge. When you go to full autonomy, the human's not in charge. When you get on a plane with a pilot, you're not in charge. That's a trained pilot, and you don't even really think he's there. You don't even think about it. You're more worried about what's on the in-flight entertainment system than anything else. And as the person next to me smells, that's what you're worried about.
I do feel like the missing opportunity. I'll back up. I'm not convinced that ADAS is all that safer either. We saw the AAA study a few years back, October of 21, I think, that showed how limited ADAS systems were in picking up pedestrians in particular. And naturally, we're seeing a huge increase in people outside the vehicle who are dying at higher rates than before, than more so than the people inside the vehicle. So I'm going to say that ADAS improves safety. I'll say that with a bit of a grain of salt. That I think there's a whole lot of room for improvement. But let's take that idea and run with it. I think that the marketing needs to include the insurance companies so that they can say to consumers at the time that they're considering, do I want this $8,000 technology package, or do I want to pay my subscription for $199 a month? If the insurance company can then be inserted in the process and say, we're going to give you a $50 discount every month because this is demonstrably safer. And now I say, oh, this is only going to cost me $4,000. And maybe if that saves one fender bender, it's paid for itself, much less a human life here. I think there's a role for marketing to include potential insurance discounts.
Insurance is going to play a large role. It will come down to economics. If the insurance company says, okay, Pete, your vehicle has a certain level of ADAS, it's been certified by independent, you enter your favorite organization here, but it's recognized by Geico, State Farm, whoever your insurance might be, and you put in your VIN number, automatically does it, you get a $50 discount a month. That's a big difference. That goes a long way. Now let's go over to the robotaxi commercial side of the house with the insurance angle. If a company went through what's called a safety audit, backed by an insurance company or a global reinsurer, for that example, and they said, we can reduce your insurance by X if you go through this audit and pass, does that start to catch on? Because you save money, but then you can go back to the policymakers and to your customers, say, look, we went through let's just call it insurance re-audit. We are hereby deemed safe. It becomes it's called the good housekeeping seal of approval.
Sure. And are the first steps in that right now companies that certified a UL 4600 or that standard that's out there? And I think that probably is the first foundational step toward this. But I think, to your point, there's more that can be layered in on top of it so that they do get the seal of approval from name your insurance company. By the way, along those lines, it's pretty interesting, and I missed the details on this, but Luminar said a few months ago, maybe it was at CES, that they're working with insurance companies on some of this. So interesting to see the LiDAR company of any of them step into that role. But maybe I need to do some research and be writing about that.
With Luminar, it goes back to the leadership of the board. They understand how to manage a public company. They understand the benefits of insurance. They're doing well there. On the safety element, yes, UL 4600, it's a start. Let's use a baseball term here. It's spring, baseball. It's a single. It doesn't mean anything. You have to take this. Andy Smart, former CTO of SAE, has this brilliant saying, you need a holistic approach. You have to look at the whole operation from the depot to where you're driving, where the vehicle is driving, to where you're operating. You have to take a whole holistic approach to safety, not this little minuscule, let me pay an organization a bunch of money. You have to take a look at a holistic approach.
I mean, I think UL 4600 is pretty interesting because it does provide a framework for saying, have you holistically thought about this and that and this angle and that one? And to your point, I think it's not the end all be all. It's a good start. It's better than anything else out there here in April 2023. There's a lot to be. We're in such early innings on automation and autonomy which is hard. It's sometimes hard to wrap our heads around because we've been talking about this for 10, 15 years at this point. But it's still early. It's kind of demoralizing. Think about that sometimes, but it is.
It's still early. The sponsor of this podcast is Stantec Gen AV, and they're looking at it from an infrastructure perspective. How do you certify safety around if you're going to operate a yard truck, so you're going to operate in a contained environment around a commercial, and that's really smart. So that's a sponsor plug there. We've covered a lot of ground. We went into my favorite topic, luxury experiences. We went into robo-taxis. We went into IPOs. We went into Jaguar Land Rover. Again, it's going to be the best-selling electric SUV of all time. I stand by my statement on that. We got 7 years left in this decade. We all can agree on one thing. There's going to be a lot of change. What type of change there's going to be, we don't know. How do you see mobility and specifically autonomy evolving over the next 7 years that are left in this decade?
Slowly. I see it primarily in the off public road areas that you just mentioned, truck yards and mining and construction operations. Probably see it in niche vehicles like garbage trucks and postal service vehicles. I think some of those like repeatable routes at low speed are really interesting. Plus, you probably have one person there to monitor it. And in vehicles, probably more, I don't want to say small scale, but more very geo-fenced rollout of level 4 robo-taxis. I don't think they're going away. There's too much momentum there. I'm not, I know there's some people who are just so down on the idea of robo-taxis that they think the whole thing's going to, fade away into history. And I don't think that's going to happen at all. I just think I think setting up in cities does require more work than some of these companies hope that their system could just kind of be dropped into a new location and do that. So that's why I think Cruise is very interesting. If they can pull that off, like that's going to be a big differentiator between them and competitors. And then you kind of get back to the personal vehicle. Mobileye is talking about self-driving systems for personally owned vehicles in the second half of the decade. I think again, like that kind of gets down to level 3. Does this work in a defined, probably highway environment? And is that something you can sell? That's why Ford gave up on Argo and went to Latitude, right? That's more or less the idea. I think level 3 has lots of complications that that's the whole next podcast maybe. But yeah, so I think all these things inch forward, but not that there's like a runaway success.
I'll be more bullish. They're not going to. I think they're going to move a lot faster than we think. The autonomous trucking will accelerate now that you can legally drive fully autonomous from Arizona to Florida. You're going to see a lot of movement in the long haul trucking. You're right on yards. The yard trucks, you'll see movement. Cruise, Waymo, probably in 2030, maybe 40 cities by the end of the decade. I'm very bullish on that. And Motional's coming up in third. Zoox, I don't know where they're going. I wish them all. I'm not sure. But yes, we will have you back to have a whole SAE level 3 conversation because it's fascinating. It's in depth, and we're going to have that before the end of the year. Pete, as we look to wrap up this insightful conversation for today, before you come back to have the level 3 conversation, what would you like our listeners to take away with them?
Yeah, I think I'll just double down on what I said earlier. Like, there's no sure thing here. There's nothing that comes without trade-offs. So whether we're talking about autonomy or electrification or the chase to zero emissions, everything is complicated right now, and that makes for some really interesting opportunities.
It makes for interesting opportunities. It makes for interesting investments and calculations. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is an expanding mobility ecosystem. Pete, thank you so much as always for coming on the road to autonomy.
Thank you for having me, Grayson. Love the conversation.
Thank you for listening to the Road to Autonomy. If you've enjoyed listening, please kindly rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Want to get in touch? Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Road to Autonomy, or email podcast@roadtoautonomy.com. The Road to Autonomy podcast is produced by the Road to Autonomy LLC. The views and opinions expressed in the Road to Autonomy podcast do not necessarily reflect those views of the Road to Autonomy, its subsidiaries, its shareholders, directors, investors, or partners. The content discussed on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be taken as legal, investment, tax, or business advice. Nothing is a recommendation that you purchase, sell, or hold any security or other investment, or that you pursue any investment style or strategy. The content of this podcast is presented on an as-is basis with no warranties, express or implied, of any kind. Financial mentions about companies in the Road to Autonomy Index and discussions about the Road to Autonomy Indexes are for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon when making any investment decision. Furthermore, an inclusion of security within the Road to Autonomy Index is not a recommendation by the Road to Autonomy Indices, LLC, to buy, sell, or hold that such security, nor is it considered to be investment advice.